Hello, how's it going, everyone? Hope you are all keeping well. Okay, I'm having some internet problems at the moment, so I've set the bitrate lower on this stream, so it'll probably be worse quality, but hopefully you'll be able to not get any loading times or any buffering. Hopefully the stream keeps it together. All right, so welcome to the Coder Dojo. Are we all ready to do Snake? So I'm going to share, let's call this one 2-player. Let's share this. Okay, so I'll paste into chat. Okay, so in chat, I've put the link to where we were up to at the end of Snake Part 2. So let's just do a quick refresh on what this code is. And then today's session, we probably won't get to the menu, but we will have enough time to basically add a second player to this game. And if you haven't done any work on the previous Snake games, that's fine, because today's session is going to be a really good lesson on how to take a single player game and add a second player to it. Okay, so let's go through some of this code while we just give a few minutes. I know I started a bit late because of the internet issues, but we'll just give it a few more minutes in case any more people are arriving. So let's do a quick refresher on what all this code does. So first of all, let's have a look at the game. So we have this Snake. Now, I know this game is Snake, but originally it was called Blockade, and you might know it more as Slither. Is Slither.io a game that you have played before? But either way, the principle is the same. You eat these little yellow food dots, food blocks, and it makes your snake tail go longer. We've got a score, a working high score as well, and the longer the game goes on, the harder it gets, because if we touch our own tail, if we run into our own tail, we lose. If we touch the edge of the screen, we also lose. I'll just demonstrate now. Edge of the screen, there we go, the game is over. And if we loop around ourselves and touch our own tail, there we go, the game is over. How's it going, FaZe? Keeping well? Hola? So we've seen what the game does now. So just as a brief look, we've got 3 sprites so far. We've got the snake head, the snake tail, and the food. So the food is pretty simple. The food creates clones of itself. I call it food, but you could call them points or collectibles. They're what you're looking to collect, and it makes your tail longer. So basically, we have this food sprite that randomly goes to different random points on the screen and creates a food. And then that food, when it starts as a clone, if you look here, the first thing it does is it does this particular function which we've named check for bad spawn. But basically, it makes sure that the food hasn't spawned right on top of the snake head or right on top of the snake tail or on the edge. If it has been created there, it just deletes itself. If it's in a spare place, it's not touching anything yet, then that's fine. Then it waits until it's touching the snake head. And when it has touched the snake head, then it does this calculate score. So it adds 1 to your score, it checks the high score, and then it adds to the snake length. All of these things are variables, which you guys have all used before, especially if you've done Snake Part 1 and 2. Hello, Falcon Fab Lab Coder Dojo. Hello, Cool Trish. Lovely to have you here. Let's see. Some other things. So the basic way that this works. So you can see it looks like we have this long snake that's wiggling around, right? It's slithering around, but it's actually a single sprite at the head of the snake, and then a bunch of cloned sprites that form the tail. So what happens is the head is continually making clones of the snake tail, and and leaving them behind, and they trail behind, and they never actually move. It's only the snake head that moves. The snake tail pieces stick around for a while, and then after a certain amount of time has gone by, they delete themselves. We control the amount of time that the tail pieces stick around with a variable, and that variable is called snake length. It starts off at 10, and then it gets, the more food you have, the longer it goes before deleting itself, and thus, the longer your tail is. Does that make sense? So that's what we have this code here for. And the snake tail pieces all individually check for collision. They all, there's a bit of a pause after they're first made, and then they check to see if they've run into the snake head. And if they ever do run into the snake head, the game is over. Because remember, in snake or slither, whatever you want to call it, if you run into your own tail, you lose. All right, so, and we probably aren't going to be doing much about, so the snake head, we've basically got we've got some variables, we've got our starting position, we have this piece of code here, if touching edge, then stop all. That makes sense. If this head ever hits the edge of the screen, you lose. And then we've got these four, what are they called? Functions, or my blocks, called point up, point down, point left, and point right. And that changes the direction that the snake head is always moving in, okay? And then the snake head always moves a certain speed, that's controlled by a variable, and it always moves a direction, that's controlled by the direction. So if everyone who hasn't been in Snake 1 and 2, have a bit of a play of, make sure you've got open the project that I linked, make sure you click Remix, and make sure you click Save so that you can share it to me if you run into problems, because this is going to be an interesting, challenging one today. But this will be useful if ever you want to take a one-player game, one that you've made or someone else has made, and hack it to make it two-player. You're going to learn some important principles of how to do that. All right, so that's probably enough time. Let's make a start on the code. So if you've been getting familiar with the game, then make sure you're back into the coding screen. I'm going to bring up my notes. Just over here on the left, and everyone get ready, and then we're going to dive into making this code. Okay, so first thing we need to do is we need to rename the sprites and rename the variables. So first of all, let's rename these two sprites. So we've got snake head and snake tail. We all need to do this at the same time. Everyone rename snake head, the sprite snake head, as player 1 head, or P1 head if you want. But I would say player 1 head. And then to do the same thing with the tail sprite. Player 1 tail. Okay, once everyone's done that, AD says, I know how to make a two-player game. I believe you. We've made two-player games before, but have you ever hacked a one-player game to turn it into a two-player game? And specifically, have you ever hacked Snake this specific Snake game to be a two-player game. This is going to be an interesting exercise today. We're going to learn a lot. Okay, so we've renamed our sprites as player 1 head and player 1 tail. Now we need to go to variables. Now there are 4 variables we are going to need to change here. So there's score, snake direction, snake length, and snake speed. We need to rename all of these variables as player 1 score, player 1 player 1 direction, player 1 length, player 1 speed. So everyone rename score as player 1 score, and then everyone rename snake direction as player 1 direction. That sounds like some sort of weird crossover between Ready Player One and a certain boy band. Let's not worry about that. All right, so let's rename snake length to player 1 length. And then let's rename snake speed to player 1 speed. All right, everyone got that? Alrighty. AD says multiple times I have made 1-player games or 2-player games. Brilliant, because I'm gonna have a lot of interesting questions that I'm gonna put to the chat, and you can answer the questions. You have experience. All right. So we've renamed all our variables. We've renamed both of our sprites. Let's make 4 new variables. We need to make player 2 direction, player 2 length, player 2 score, and player 2 speed. So, top left corner, click on make a variable, player 2 direction, and then after that, make a new variable, player 2 length. And then after that, you nearly deleted your snake length variable, AD. I'm glad that's nearly. Player. In fact, it probably wouldn't let you, because if it's being used, Scratch is like, you can't delete this variable until you've removed it from your code, which is a nice thing that it lets you, that it kind of protects you from deleting your variable by accident if it's being used. All right, we need to make player 2 score. And we need to do player 2 speed. So basically, all the player 1 variables, we need player 2 versions of them as well. Hello, Ms. Yeti. Lovely to have you here. So I've got just the player 1 score visible, and the high score visible, and the player 2 score visible. Those are the 3 that I've got ticked. Probably don't need the my variable either. All right, let's save this, and I'll relink it. Chrome warned you. About deleting the variable. It would have come up in a Chrome browser, but I actually think it's Scratch that generates the warning. I could be wrong there. Feel free to correct me. So we've got our variables are set up now to turn this from a 1-player game into a 2-player game. We've got our 4-player 1 variables and our 4-player 2 variables. I've just made all of these variables as for all sprites, just for ease. We probably don't technically need them to all be what are called global variables, but there's no problem with having them as global variables, so I've just made them global variables. So with each of those new variables, I've just left it as for all sprites, and I think that shouldn't be a problem. In fact, some of them will need to be global variables. Yeah, so just make sure all your variables are for all sprites when you make them. For all sprites is ticked there. Sweet. Okay, so we've got our variable set up, and we've renamed our our two sprites here as player one head and player one tail. All right, and then what we need to do is we need to start looking. Yeah, let's make a new sprite. Yeah, let's do that. So bottom right corner, hover over Paint New Sprite. And this sprite is going to be called Game Over. And we need 2 costumes. I'm going to give you some time to do this. We need to have a costume for no, that's fine. We'll keep going with this. We probably could leave this till later, but that's fine. We'll do this first. We need a costume for player one. This is going to be the game over screen that comes up. We're going to have a costume for player one wins and player two wins. So I'm just going to click on Convert to Bitmap, and then I'm just going to put, this is what I'm going to make mine look like. You can make yours look different if you want. Player one wins. Exclamation mark. All right. And make sure that you've named the costume in the top left corner next to costume as player one wins. And once you've done that, we need to make another costume, however you like, for player two wins. I might just paint it from scratch. Yeah. And decide at this point what color you want your second player to be. I'm going to choose red. And do another. Player two wins. Player two wins. And let's make that nice and big. Player one wins. Player two wins. Lovely. Make sure that the costumes are named. Player two wins. Alrighty, let's save this. So if you get stuck, you can always check out my version of the code, link in the chat. So we should have our game over sprite. We should have 2 costumes, player 1 wins and player 2 wins. How's everyone going with that? Has everyone got that sorted? I'll give you just a bit of time just to finish that off, and then we're going to dive into some code. So how's everyone going? I'm just going to catch up with the chat now. Oh, we've got some backwards text here. YouTube. I see we've got some people who dislike Java and hate JS. I'm actually at the moment learning Game Maker, which uses, I believe, a JavaScript-based language called GML. It's tough. I'm not used to written syntax very much, especially when things get complicated when you're doing stuff with games. There's a lot of the syntax I'm just not used to. But it's good fun. I'm working my way through a bunch of the tutorials. At some point, maybe we'll even do some Coder Dojo stuff with Game Maker, or some other interesting languages. All right. Okay, so hopefully everyone. So the other thing as well, just make sure that your game over screen is centered. Make sure its coordinates are x0 and y0. And then after that, let's get stuck into this code. So what we need to do is we need to duplicate our player 1 head and duplicate our player 1 tail. So right click, and actually, should we do this? Yeah. So duplicate the player 1 head and duplicate the player 1 tail. And then rename the player 1 head, the second one. So you should have now a sprite called player 1 head 2 and player 1 tail 2. Rename that to player 2 head and player 2 tail. And then, once you've done that, change the color of the sprite, the block. I'm going to go to red. You can choose whatever color you like. I'll give you a bit of time just to do that. Yes. Milo is, yes. So now we've got the Australian ninjas explaining what Milo is. Yeah, Milo was something that I did not have any experience with in the UK, Ms. Yeti. I'd never encountered Milo. It's a very Australian thing. It's kind of like hot chocolate. If you've ever had powdered hot chocolate, it's kind of like that, but it's kind of more malt tasting, if that makes any sense, sort of this sort of malt taste. It's very Australian. You can kind of make milkshakes with it, and you make it hot, like a hot chocolate. And you can put it in desserts and that kind of thing as well. It's basically kind of like powdered hot chocolate. Okay, so has everyone gotten their 2 sprites, player 2 head and player 2 tail? AD is advising that Milo is very tasty, eaten right out of the tin. And Ms. Yeti, no, we don't have chavs in Australia. In Australia, the closest thing we have are bogans, who are kind of, it's kind of like a term that we use for kind of like Australians who are like kind of maybe a bit like surfers, and they listen to like maybe rock and roll and yeah, that kind of thing. So all this cultural talk aside, let's get back to the code. Hopefully you enjoyed that little break and you've gotten your little your sprites already, because we are going to go back to the code. So everyone make sure that you are up to date with all of that. We are going to go to player 2. So first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we have 2 different starting positions for player 1 and player 2. So where is the starting position code here in player 1 head and player 2 head? Let me know in the comments. Where is that? Because what we're going to do, so you can decide where you want the starting position to be. But if you don't know, I'm just going to tell you, and then we're going to, because I found something that I quite liked in terms of starting positions. All right, so hopefully you got your answers in about how to change the starting positions of player 1 head and player 2 head, because currently their starting positions are the middle of the screen, x0, y0. So you need to look at the when green flag clicked. Right underneath it, it's got go to x and go to x0, y0. What you need to do is you need to change it. So, for example, this is what I've put in. I've got player 2. Player 2 is going to x minus 100, y 100. Then I've got player 1 going to the reverse. So they're going to kind of be, one of them's going to be kind of like in a little bit in that corner, and one of them's going to be like a little bit in that corner. I'll show you in a second where they're going to go. So we've got x minus 100 and y minus 100 for player 2, and then for player 1, I've got the reverse, so x 100, y minus 100. Okay. So now what we need to do is we need to have a look at some of the variables in player 2. So we've gotten their starting position sorted out. Now let's look at the variables in player 2. So first of all, look at this first block of code. When green flag clicked, set player 1 direction to 0. Set player 1 speed to 5. Can you see the problem? We need to change these variables. So everyone go to player 2 code, have a look, and start changing out these variables. So we need to make sure that it's set player 2 direction to 0, player 2 direction, player 2 speed to 5. Keep looking down. What else do you see? Move player 1 speed steps. We need to change that. Drag that out, throw it out. Drag out a player 2 speed, so it's moved player 2 speed steps. Hello Kitty Comics, how's it going? Hope you've been keeping well. We are adapting a 1-player game into a 2-player game. Let me link it to you. Alrighty, how's everyone going with changing out all the variables in player 2 head? So look for anything that says player 1, and you've got to change it so that it's the player 2 equivalent. So we've got to look at these point up has this code: if not player 1 direction equals 180, then set player 1 direction to 0. We need to change those to both player 2 direction. So if not player 2 direction equals 180, then set player 2 direction to 0. So we've got to hunt down all of these variables and change them. If you miss any, something will go wrong. So keep looking and keep making sure that you're getting make sure also that you get the right one. So if you change out a player 1 direction for a player 2 speed, things will go very wrong, won't they? So keep going. It's mostly just player 2 directions that you need to swap out. Everything else can stay the same for now. All these numbers refer to the direction that the snake is going, and that's fine. Now there is one exception. We need to talk about controls, because currently both player 1 and player 2 are both set to the same controls. So I'm just going to hide this game over screen. Cool. So we've got a few. So this is mostly working, apart from the fact that they're both the same controls. And the fact that we don't have a tail for our player 2 yet, do we? How's everyone going so far? Alrighty. How's everyone going? We all keeping up with the coding? I see that there's a spirited debate about British imperialism and the history thereof, as it relates specifically to Indian cuisine as well. Glad to hear it. There's some very robust conversation going on here. So, what we're going to need to do, to be fair, Mezietti, I am also English, so, well, originally. I do have my Australian citizenship now. But that's where my accent comes from. Alrighty. So guys, I hope we're having fun with the conversation, but we're also keeping up with the programming. How's everyone going? Anyone getting any glitches so far? You should be up to this point here where both players are controlling okay. One of them doesn't yet have a tail. And they should be spawning in like two sort of diagonal points. And there's so like you can see the red square is spawning in the sort of top left area, and the purple square is spawning in the bottom right area. All right, cool. So we need to fix the tail, don't we? So everyone come with me, and we're going to look at now the player 2 tail. So first of all, let's have a look. So first of all, we've got set player 1. So player 2 tail, look at the code, and let's look underneath when green flag clicked. We've got set player 1 length to 10. Well, we need to change that, don't we? So click the green arrow and change it to set player 2 length. And then we need to look at, underneath that we've got forever, go to player 1 head. We need to change that so it's player 2 head. And then we've got underneath when I start as clone, look down, and can you see that it says repeat player 1 length? We need to change that. We need this to be player 2 length. Now, let's talk about collision, shall we? So we need to, so currently we have check for collision in player 2 tail and player 1 tail are very simple. We've got if touching player 1 head, then stop all. Well, let's get rid of that stop all. So have a look under player 2 tail, look under define check for collision, and you should have now if touching player 1 head, then. What we're going to do is we're going to make a broadcast, and this broadcast is going to be the signal for our game over sprite to flash up and show itself with whoever has won. Okay, so we're going to code our game over sprite later, but for now, in player 2 tail, and we need to make 2 broadcasts. So click on events. So AD, I think that's enough of that conversation now, because it's kind of distracting from what we're actually trying to do today, which is coding. So I'm not going to let your that particular comment that you make show, okay? I understand you're trying to be funny, but it's just going to start like kind of an argument, okay? Let's create these broadcasts, shall we? So everyone go to events and drag out broadcast message 1 near the bottom, and click on the white triangle, put it inside if touching player 1 head then. So this is the collision code for the player 2 tail. It doesn't actually matter because the collision code is going to be the same for both the player 2 tail and the player 1 tail. So if touching player 1 head, so this is then, which means that the player 1 head has run into one of the tails, we need to broadcast that player 1, because it's run into a tail, has lost the game. So we click on this white triangle next to broadcast message 1, and we click on new message, and we're going to type in player 2 wins. Okay? So now we need to do the same thing if player 2 runs into the tail. So right-click on that if under the if touching player 1 head then. So right-click on that if, duplicate, and put it right underneath. And then look, if touching player 2 head, then broadcast who wins. All right, AD, what's the answer? If the player 2 tail, it doesn't matter which tail it is actually, because it doesn't matter. If you run into one of the tails, you lose, remember. So if the player 2 head runs into one of the tails, who wins? Answer in chat. In fact, not only AD, everyone. What's the answer? If you don't know, that's fine. Sit tight. I'm about to explain it. So if player 2 runs into one of the tails, then it's the player 1 who wins. So we need to make a new broadcast. Click on that white triangle. New message. Good job, AD. Well done. Player 1 wins. Sweet. All right, cool. So now we've got these very simple ways of deciding which player has won and which player has lost, right? So this code here, check for collision, this code needs to be exactly the same in the player 1 tail as it is in the player 2 tail. So drag this if and drag it across so we have both this whole block underneath the bit that's underneath check for collision, and drag the whole thing to player 1 tail. And then in player 1 tail, throw out everything that's underneath check for collision and put it underneath check for collision. Okay, sweet. So we should have our so let's have a bit of a test. Now immediately we're going to find it very hard to play for very long. We still haven't reprogrammed the food to work with Oh, but we can run into our own tail at the moment, can't we? Yes, that's fine, because we haven't sorted out the broadcast yet. But that seems to be good. That's what we should be up to now. We should have a tail for both snakes. Now, what we're going to do as well is we're going to make it so that when the game starts, player 2 is going to start facing down. So so who knows how to do that? This is a challenging one because you have to know how angles work. You have to know how geometry works. If you're used to, if you've done that in school with like your protractor, if you understand that there are 360 degrees in a circle and all that kind of stuff. So if you don't know, that's fine. I'm about to tell you. But anyone who does know, what direction in Scratch is pointing down? And where would we put that number to make it so that when the game starts, player 2 is facing down, using the code that we already have? If you don't know the answer, sit tight, I'm about to explain it. If you do know the answer, tell me in chat. All right. Alrighty, see you, oil cans. Alrighty. So, don't have any answers yet. So, although that could be the delay. So, the answer is if you go to, so we're in player 2 head, look underneath when green flag clicked, and then you should see just underneath it, underneath the starting position code, we've got set player 2 direction to 0, which is up. Change that to 180 and then hit go, and you should now have these 2 snakes that go in the same direction. And they're able to touch their own tails right now because we haven't programmed anything to happen when we make those broadcasts yet. So this is like a good way of testing. And now there's one more thing that we need to do, and that's we need to put, well, first of all, let's change the collision code for when one of the snakes runs into a wall. So we should already be there for player 2. You should see right underneath where it says forever, just underneath where we were using player 2 directions. Alrighty, so AD is asking for help. So I assume you're on Yo-Yo Cake. And also, can you explain what is going wrong? Kitty Comics, I'd appreciate it if you didn't try and start a second stream to pull people away from this one. That's actually a bit rude. You're welcome to do with what you want, but I'd appreciate it if you don't come into my stream and halfway through say, oh, come and join my stream, guys. That's pretty rude, okay? Just as a bit of, like, politeness, okay? So let's go and have a look at Yo-Yo Cakes. Alrighty. So, AD, can you give me some more specifics? Oh, so you have you saved? Let's go back. Have you saved all the changes that we've been making? I don't see any of the changes at all. So I cannot help you right now. So, and we're actually getting close to the end of the session. So here's a good coding tip. If you spend a little less time talking about Milo and more time watching the stream, then you'll pick up a lot more. I'm joking, dude. I'm joking. A little bit. Okay, so we'll have to come back to that later, AD, because we've got to finish this off first, and then I think probably a good idea for you to watch the stream at the end, or we'll fix it at the end. Okay, so where are we up to? So we've got the collision working for the tails. Now we need to change the collision for the edge. All right, we'll have a quick look at. So AD says it's working now. So let's have a quick look at AD's code. Let's have a look down here. right. Okay, so I think I can see what immediately there are some problems. Okay, so you haven't changed any of the directions, AD. You just need to go through all of the directions, look for every time it says P1 snake direction, and change it to P2 snake direction, and done. Okay. Also, check it's all the variables. That's what you need to check. You need to make sure all the variables, so you've got a mistake as well here on the P1 head, where you've got set P1 snake direction to 0 and then set P1 snake direction to 5. You need that one to be P1 speed. All right. But yeah, the main thing is just changing all the directions in player 2. You haven't changed any of them, so that explains it. All right. So back to it, because we're going to run out of time soon. So we need to have so we need to all go to player 1 head, the sprite, look under if touching edge, then stop all. We need to remove this stop all, because we're not using that to control if the game stops now. Instead, we are using those broadcasts. So we need to. So if player 1 runs into the edge, who wins? Player 2. So drag out broadcast. Player 2 wins. Make sure you change it by clicking on that white triangle and put it inside if touching edge. And so then we just need to do the same thing for the player 2 head. Drag out that stop all from inside the if touching edge and put in a broadcast player 1 wins. Yeah, if player 2 runs into the wall, then player 1 wins. All right, that all makes sense. The other thing that we need to change is the controls, because currently they are both being controlled by the same buttons. So what you need to do is you need to look in either player 1 or player 2, doesn't matter. Change one of those from all the arrow keys to the WASD keys. So the red one's on the left, and that's player 2. So I'm going to change all the player 2 controls. So if you look at key up arrow pressed, well, that needs to change to what? What's the equivalent of up arrow in WASD? If you don't know the answer, it's W. So change key up arrow to W, change key down arrow to S, change key left arrow to A, and change key right arrow to D. All right. So now we should have 2 individually controlling snakes. How's everyone going with that? Yes, absolutely, Falcon Fab Lab. Very good. All right. So currently there's no way of like winning or losing the game because we don't have the code that reacts to our broadcasts of player 1 wins or player 2 wins yet, do we? But that's fine. We're going to put that in later. This also makes it easier to test. You can make sure that everything else is working apart from the winning or the losing. So then the other thing that we need to do. Thank you very much, Kitty Comics. Much appreciated. It does look pretty cool. All right, so what we're going to do now is we are going to, we need to have a look at the food. I don't know if you've noticed this, but player 2 is not picking up the food. So we need to look at our player 2, we need to look at our food code. And what we need to do is we need to look for the code that dictates when the food has been touched by player 1 head. And that's underneath when I start as clone. So we need to say that also we need to put in an OR. Now I don't know if we've used ORs much before. So that's OR, as in something or something, player 1 or player 2. So everyone go to operators, the green category on the left, and look sort of in the middle. You should see this operator here called OR, and it's got two little six-sided shapes on it. So then what we need to do is, can you see where we've got wait until touching player 1 head? You need to put that OR inside. And then we need to make sure that it says wait until touching player 1 head or touching player 2 head. Okay? So then it's going to run this my block here, calculate score. So we have this whole piece of code here, which is change player 1 score and then do some stuff with the high score. This whole thing needs to happen only if player 1 has touched the food, if player 1 has eaten the food, right? So we need to put in an if touching player 1. So everyone go to control, look in the middle for an if statement, drag that out, put it underneath calculate score, drag out the whole block of change player 1 score, all of that stuff that was underneath calculate score, and put it inside the if. I'll make it a bit bigger so you can see what I've done here. All right, and then we're going to drag out touching mouse pointer. But we don't want it to be touching mouse pointer, we want it to be touching player 1 head. Put that inside the if then. So now we've got this whole bit of code that says if touching the player 1 head, then change the player 1 score by 1, and then do this whole piece of code that updates the high score. So we just now can very simply copy all of that. I know I'm going a bit quick because we're running out of time, so apologies for that. Hopefully everyone is keeping up. So right-click on the if, duplicate that whole thing, and then the second one, all of that needs to say player 2 score instead of, it all needs to say player 2 instead of player 1, right? So we need to change that if touching player 1 head to player 2 head. We need to change player 2 to player 1 score to player 2 score. And we need to go to variables and drag out 2 of these. Take out the player 1 scores, put in the player 2 scores. All right, I'll make sure that everyone's got a bit of time to do that. We're nearly done. Okay. There's one more thing. Can you see underneath, if you look back at the when I start as clone piece of code, look towards the bottom, and right before delete this clone, it says change player 1 length by 1. We only want that to happen if it's the player 1 who's eaten the food, right? So drag out that change player 1 length by 1 and put it underneath if touching player 1 head, and that's underneath the define calculate score, right? And if you're a bit stuck on this one, I did warn you this one would be a bit trickier today. But as always, I'll provide you the code so you can kind of see how it works. So now we should be able to, with player 2, eat food. And our player 2 score goes up. And I'm just going to zoom in on this so you guys can see it. and our player 2 length goes up as well. Feel free to turn some of the variables back on so you can make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Remember, the player 2 length variable dictates how long those tail blocks stick around for. Okay, so now what we need to do is, there's only one thing that we need to do now. We've got pretty much everything working. Although actually, while we're here in the food code, can you look for check for bad spawn? Can you see that piece of code where it says define check for bad spawn? Duplicate. So it asks 3 questions. Am I touching the edge? If so, delete this clone. Am I touching the player 1 head? If so, delete this clone. Am I touching the player 1 tail? If so, delete this clone. And this basically prevents food from being spawned right on top of the snake tail, which kind of looks bad and feels wrong. So all you need to do is right-click on the if next to if touching player 1 head and duplicate that whole thing, because we need to ask 2 more questions. And they're very simple. Are you touching the player 2 head? If so, delete this clone. Are you touching the player 2 tail? If so, delete this clone. It's not vital for the game to work, but I do think it makes a big difference to how the game plays. All right, that seems good. How's everyone going? Keeping up? All right, so the last thing that we need to do, because we've got everything else working, as far as I'm aware. Last thing that we need to do is we just need to put in some code into our game over sprite. And that code basically does something when we broadcast the message player 1 wins or player 2 wins. Very simple. Oh, there is one more thing we need to do. One more thing we need to do. So if you're still in the food sprite, everyone do this with me. Look for when green flag clicked. We reset the player 1 score to 0 at the beginning of at the beginning of every game, right? We set the score to 0 when you start the game. Otherwise, it remembers the score that you had in the previous game and just adds to it. It does that for player 1, but it doesn't do it for player 2 yet. So drag down the whole block of code where it's got just sort of the hide and everything below it, and insert an extra set variable to 0 and make it so that this one is player 2 score. Does that make sense? All right. So we have just enough time to put in the last bit of code that we need for game over. Yeah, I think everything else is working fine. All right, cool. So, very simple, actually. Very, very simple. We just need to, at the beginning of the game, make sure that this game over sprite hides itself. So, beginning of the game means we drag out when green flag clicked. We go to looks, and we look for the hide variable, drag out the hide variable. What am I talking about? It's not a variable. Drag out the hide. I suppose it could be a function, yeah. Hide function, the hide code. So make sure that the game over sprite is hidden at the beginning of the game. But when we receive a certain one of 2 broadcasts, we want it to show again. So drag out when I receive broadcast. So it should say when I receive player 1 wins. Then what we need to do is we need to go to looks, drag out switch costume to player 1 wins, and show. So you should have when I receive player 1 wins, the broadcast, the one that we send out every time we know that the player 1 is supposed to have won. We switch costume to player 1 wins, which makes sense, and we show, because it was hidden before. And now right-click on when I receive and duplicate that whole thing and change it all to player 2. Okay. So now we should have, and there's one more thing we need to do, and that is once we've shown, we need to stop all. Both of those when I receives needs to have a stop all, otherwise the game will keep playing behind the scenes and could change what's going on. So now, we should have, that's interesting, they can go head to head. Yeah, that's an interesting glitch. All right, so let's make it so that player 2 wins. Yeah, there we go. All right, cool. There we go. So that should be everything. So the key here is just checking all of the variables, knowing what the variables do, making sure that you've selected the correct variables, making sure that all of your player 1s and player 2s are all in the right place, and just think sort of logically about everything. And that's pretty much everything. So that is good. So if you had any problems, just give it like a little bit of time and watch the and feel free just to watch the video, the YouTube video. It'll save probably maybe an hour or so. I think after the stream finishes, it's available. Actually, it might be a little bit longer, but feel free just to watch this video again. Fast forward to the bits where you got stuck or confused. We're talking about Milo, yeah, you can refresh yourself that way. Otherwise, I will copy this code, snake 2 player. I'll make this. I'll save this. So yeah, you can check out my code right here on Scratch. That is everything. I don't think there's anything else that I missed. If there is, I will make sure that I post the updated code so you can check it out. Send me a message or leave a comment on the YouTube video if you run into any problems or if you have any questions or if you have any tutorials that you would like me to cover. So yeah, as always, guys. Oh yeah, so next week, I have a week off. There'll be one video going up on the YouTube channel, but that'll be a video for people who are really new to Scratch. Because, yeah, so next week is school holidays, so I hope you guys enjoy your school holidays. The week after, I'll be continuing to do these probably just once a week on Thursdays. So, yeah, if there are any particular lessons you'd like me to do, then send me a message, and I'll put it in for week after next. So I shall see you guys in 1 week on Thursday. I haven't yet decided what that lesson's going to be. It's going to be a surprise. But if you keep an eye on the YouTube channel, I will put it up in the next couple of days, and you can see it booked in as the next stream that's coming up. Ba Sing Se, excellent. Yeah, so I shall see you guys not next week, but the week after on Thursday at 4 p.m. And until then, stay awesome, be cool to each other, and take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time, ninjas.